Hello, everyone, and welcome to Food Safety Matters, the podcast for food safety professionals. I'm Stacey Atchison, publisher of Food Safety Magazine, and I want to thank you for joining us for this special bonus episode. Today, Food Safety Magazine's editorial director and co-host of the podcast, Adrienne Bloom, welcomes back Dr. Alissa Welsher from Elanco to discuss why fly control is a critical part of poultry food safety, especially during the warmer months, when fly populations can rapidly increase. They'll explore how flies can spread pathogens such as Salmonella, Campylobacter, and E. coli throughout poultry operations, why integrated pest management is the foundation of effective fly control strategy, and how monitoring tools and targeted treatments can help producers protect bird welfare and reduce food safety risks before they become larger problems. But before we hear that interview, let me share a little bit about our guest. Dr. Alissa Welsher is a senior consultant at Elanco Poultry Food Safety. She holds a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from the University of Pittsburgh, as well as a master's degree in poultry science and a PhD in cell and molecular biology from the University of Arkansas. Dr. Welsher specializes in meat and poultry food safety with particular expertise in integrated pest management. And now, here's their discussion.
So as temperatures rise during the summer months, fly populations can become a significant challenge for poultry integrators. Flies can impact bird welfare, biosecurity, and food safety efforts if populations are not effectively controlled. So today we are joined by Dr. Alissa Welsher, poultry technical consultant with Elanco Animal Health, to discuss why fly pressure tends to increase during warmer months, the risks flies can pose within poultry operations, and how producers can take a proactive approach to fly control through integrated pest management strategies. So welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Welsher.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So, all right, just kind of cutting to the chase here. Let's talk about why flies become such a bigger challenge in poultry houses during the summer months and, what kind of conditions tend to drive those pressures that we see?
Right. It's a great question. So during the summer months and, kind of late spring, we have an increase in temperature, and that's usually nationwide. We start kind of getting those warmer climates coming in. Some places are a little wetter than others as those rainstorms come in, the old adage of April showers bring May flowers. So it tends to also bring in some flies. What we start to see is that anything that's really outside insect-wise, flies especially, they now have an opportunity to breed really anywhere, right? So anywhere there's a potential for a breeding site, that weather, those warm conditions, as well as those wet conditions help to increase their population. And so what we see is we start to get these fly blooms in late spring and early summer where, we just start seeing a large population on the outside, which then kind of moves inside of the poultry houses. And the reason being, right, is we give all of the feed, all of the water, all of the protection inside of these poultry houses. And so flies, a population that is outside, if they're seeking food, right, and there's food kind of, they sense it in these poultry houses, they can fly up to about 5 miles on a good day and fly into these poultry houses. Now, that might not be where they're headed immediately. We have dumpsters, we have garbage cans, all kinds of other things on a property as well. So they're going to probably sense that first. And then they will obviously sense, the organic material and things like that tend to be in poultry houses and swine barns and things like that. So, when we look at a fly's life cycle, from egg to adult, it's just a few days, right? It's about 7 to 10 days. And so because of that, we have these large blooms in these perfect breeding conditions in the summer. And so what really drives a lot of this is, it's the access to those wet environments. It's access to potential harborage if they find long grass outside of a poultry house, if they find their way into the poultry house, right? And then they start contributing to those populations inside. So we look at it as kind of the season of the fly. Whenever we start looking at these, patterns over time, You will see them drop a bit in the fall and the winter, but you always see them rise in the spring and the summer, and it's mainly again due to those warm and wet conditions.
Well, I did not know that flies could fly 5 miles in one day. So that's a new factoid I learned today. But as you pointed out, flies are very versatile insects, and they can survive inside, outside. But those poultry houses really create an environment that they want to be around because there's food, there's shelter, there's harborage points. So when we're looking at this from a food safety perspective, why should poultry teams take fly control seriously, aside from the obvious nuisance factor?
Yeah, so flies are one of the main insect vectors that we see in animal livestock. And this cuts across a lot of species, but poultry and swine, right, we tend to have indoor areas all throughout the year. And so they're one of those vectors that really, if you think about it, they almost look kind of like a bee. I always tell people, how a bee carries pollen in those little pollen sacs in the back? Well, flies have these sensory hairs all over their body. And when they land on something, things like bacterial pathogens and viral pathogens can stick to those sensory hairs. And so when they land on, say, fecal matter, they can fly off and then they are going to want to eat, right? So then they land on feed. So whatever was on that fecal matter could now be transferred to the feed that then the poultry, swine, cattle are eating. And obviously, a small amount of that is not going to affect a large animal very readily. But think of how many flies. I mentioned just earlier, in 7 to 10 days, egg to adult, right? So it's a very quick reproduction and it's a very quick to adult stage. And so if you start thinking about that and you think about how many offspring they can produce in a season, it's a high number. And that those flies landing from, potential fecal matter, decomposing matter, and then landing onto feed, you have this contamination issue. There can be a lot of different vector-borne diseases that are spread in poultry houses. And if you think of things on the food safety perspective, we look at, E. coli and Salmonella, and those two are readily transferred by flies. We even get things like Campylobacter that we can find on flies that, they're picking up these viral and bacterial pathogens and they're just spreading them around the poultry houses.
Okay, interesting. So now that we have a better understanding of how flies can, transmit that contamination to the poultry houses and to the birds themselves, how can flies fit into a broader integrated pest management program instead of, being treated as a standalone issue?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So, integrated pest management is kind of your first go-to, right? Whenever you're looking at one of these situations, whether it be insect vectors or rodent vectors, we look at trying to manage the situation before we apply any type of insecticide or rodenticide or pesticide or whatever it may be. So first, what we're going to do is in this IPM strategy, we're really looking at, is organic material picked up? Is the grass outside of houses too long where these vectors can be hiding, right? So flies can end up finding harborage sites there. They can end up finding good material, breeding material there, as well as ingesting some of the organic material that comes out and around poultry houses and kind of gets stuck in that grass. You also want to make sure that it's not too wet outside. I did mention earlier that it is summer and spring, and we do get a lot of rain showers across the country here. And so you're going to have puddled water and you're going to have wet areas. So some of this is very, very hard to, not have on your property. But if there is a way to reduce the risk of standing water, whether that's filling in a hole with gravel or with dirt or whatever it may be, sawdust, a way to just kind of dry that up or maybe not have as many of these standing waters on a property helps as well, because it helps to diminish those breeding sites, which is a really big piece of it. But you really want to make sure that a lot of those management pieces are tight. And as soon as those are kept up, then you kind of move more into using insecticides and things like that. But along the way, while we're kind of looking at these IPMs, we want to monitor it, right? So we want to monitor the population. So when we first do the management system, we might say, okay, we're going to put a fly spot card out. And what that is, it's really like an index card. You kind of put it in areas where flies are going to be resting or landing. And what you're going to do is you're going to count fly spots. And fly spots are basically two different colored spots. So a darker one is fecal matter and the lighter one is vomit. And flies vomit and they defecate when they land at the same time. So you want to count just one of those spots. So either dark or light. I tend to stick to dark because you can see it a little bit better. So count those, and that's kind of your baseline while you're kind of looking at your IPM, right? While you're picking up that organic material, you're going through the houses looking for anything else that might be out of place. And then once you establish that your IPM is set and you do have a problem that, not just an IPM can handle, that you do need to add an insecticide, you have a baseline for that population. So now you can add in the insecticide and track how well that insecticide works by looking and managing those fly cards, right? So these spec cards can be hung wherever, again, flies are going to land. And I would recommend, you do that baseline and then maybe you do one a couple weeks after the insecticide is applied and then do one towards the end of the life of the flock. And I would say that just because then you can kind of monitor how that population fluctuates within the house. And just kind of gives you an idea of how many flies could be in your house at a time.
And those spot cards are going to be, put up or applied strategically throughout the poultry house, correct? Like different locations.
Correct. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you don't want them in like one spot. You
Mhm.
tend to kind of put them, yeah, throughout the house and then monitor those areas almost as individual areas. And then you kind of can compile that at the end, right? But you'll tend to note that, if you've near your choline cells where it tends to be a little bit wetter, you're going to see probably some there because it's a wetter environment. They like that environment. You might see them by, the main feed hoppers that are in inside of the barn. You're going to see them there. You might see them in, kind of corner areas where flies tend to hide out. So you want to put them where you do see flies, and then you will be able to note, maybe areas that might need a little bit extra help and extra treatment when you are applying those insecticides.
Hmm. Well, I'm glad you mentioned, about the importance of maintenance upkeep and also, the emphasis on those areas of wetness or pooling, being so
Mhm.
important to try to eradicate. And of course, it's not just flies, there's other insects that are attracted to standing water. So, obviously
Yes.
important for a variety of reasons. But, when fly activity starts to increase, what should integrators and applicators be watching for? And like kind of what are the first steps they should take when they're seeing that increase in activity?
Sure. And so a lot of that, it kind of transitions from what we were just talking about, right? Those spot cards are going to be a good indicator for them, as well as just, it will be visual. A lot of sometimes it will say like, okay, some of our managers who are on farm or our service techs or our growers have noticed an uptick, right? They're there every day. They notice it. Some flies, a population might be really, really low. And then a population all of a sudden, a week later, they're like, wow, I really, I really have a high population on this farm. And that might be without those spec cards. The spec card is just a little bit more of a concrete tool to use in the sense of you can actually really visually start to see and mathematically deduce kind of how many are in that population. But a lot of applicators, if what they're going to look for, they're going to look around kind of entry points into the houses. So, do they see a lot of flies coming in and out? Right when you open a door, are there flies just coming in and out, or is it just one or two? Are there a bunch of them in that area? A lot of the time, the doors are white. Flies really, really like the color white. They're going to stay like want to stay on to areas that are a lighter color. And so some of these white doors, you'll open or close, you'll just see flies resting on them. And so you can kind of take an early count, like, okay, that might be an issue that looks like this is a high population. You're going to want to look around your manure sheds, your compost piles, things like that, if you have those on farm. Look around any dumpsters that might be there as well. And you're going to really kind of start to look within the house and say, okay, are there places in here where it's attracting the flies, right? So is there extra wet litter, extra manure? And what might be a solution to that is, right, you might top dress your litter. And that obviously would not be until maybe the next flock. But you notice that maybe you have a point on the farm or inside of that house where extra moisture tends to accumulate, and that really helps draw flies into the house. They really like those areas. You want to make sure that you don't have any feed spillage. So sometimes if there's a feed spillage too, or just on the pad, you'll start to see that there's a lot of flies that will be right around the hopper. And if there is feed spillage, they will definitely be attracted to that, and that just attracts more and more. So applicators may see that and say, okay, there might be an increase due to this as well. And really, again, once you start to see that increase, that's kind of when you start walking around your houses. Is there something attracting them here? Other than, it's just summer, it's just spring. What is bringing them here? And then basically based off of that, you start to manage that piece and then look at ways to control it further. So that would be your insecticide classes.
Well, I think those are some really good, steps that you outlined that, poultry integrators can take when they're starting to see that uptick in fly activity. And when we're looking toward further steps that, you can take to control these fly populations that we start seeing ramp up in the summer, where does a product like Agita fit into a fly control program? And also, why is it important to pair tools with monitoring, sanitation, and other management practices?
Right. So it's a great question. With things like pairing these tools, I'll start there because it really is important to have an IPM. That's your kind of first go-to. You really want to assess your farm and your barns, and you want to make sure that, okay, maybe there are some areas where these flies are coming from that are on my own property that I could deal with, and right, we can lower the population just like that. A lot of the time you're going to need a little bit of help. And because of that, that's kind of where those insecticides come into play. So you're pairing those two together in the sense of if you have a really bad management program, say like there's a lot of organic material, there's a lot of long grass, there's standing water, there's or there's just things everywhere, feed spillage, that attracts all of the flies. And you could spray as much as you want insecticide in there. It's still going to be attracting flies. So you might be getting rid of a lot of them, but you're also attracting a lot of them. And so it doesn't really, you're just stuck in this cycle. It doesn't really do anything. If you have good management, again, you're kind of like your first piece, then you move on to, okay, how can we really clean this up and target these pests? So that's when you start to bring in certain products. So Agita is a neonicotinoid. So it's a type of class of chemical that we have of use in the poultry industry. We have 4 different chemical classes, and this is one. It also has a sex pheromone in it that is specific to houseflies. So it basically attracts them to it as well. So with Agita, you kind of want to be a little bit careful with where you spray it. Obviously, we follow the label on these products as to where you spray it and how you want to use it. But with Agita, if you want to spray it in areas that flies are already attracted to, so again, those light areas, and maybe even try to keep it close to a door, but not necessarily in a doorway, so you're not also attracting them in there. So they will come to it, but the really beauty about Agita is that it is what we call kind of a quick kill, right? So you could spray Agita and you can watch flies come to it and they immediately die afterwards after touching it. So it is a very quick product, and it's great for fly pressure. When fly pressure becomes too high, it really is one that will take it down. Now it is an adulticide, meaning it will only affect the adults of the population. And so another pairing you can always do is pairing it with an IGR. And these are just growth regulators. And what those do is those affect more of the larva stage, and they don't allow them to reach maturity into that adult fly. So you can pair these types of products together. You don't want to pair the chemical classes together. So pyrethroids, neonicotinoids, organophosphates, and spinosins should all be rotated and not used together. But you can use the IGRs, the growth regulators, because it's more of a physical type of class. If you think of it like that, it affects the morphology of that insect, along with one of the chemical neurotransmitter type effects of those neurotoxin chemicals. So what you want to do is use those together and have one that affects the adults and one that affects the larva, and you really can get that control back on your population. And it really is one of those things, again, where you just monitor it with those spec cards if you can. You can monitor it visually, but you can ask your applicator, you can ask us, you can ask any of your allied partners as well, and they will help you to create an effective fly control strategy, because really it is so important to food safety, but also bird welfare, as you mentioned earlier, and also just the welfare of your employees as well.
Well, that's great. And so where can people find out more information about Agita specifically?
So we have all of our products listed on our website at Elanco, and we have basically whole portfolio based around poultry. You can look at it over and say, okay, I want fly control, I want mite control. But if you want to look at fly control specifically, we have a lot. We have some feed through IGRs, some spray IGRs. We also have chemicals in each one of those classes that they can use in the industry as well.
Well, great. Thanks for, directing our listeners to where they can find out more information about these resources and, not only Agita itself, but how it can be combined with other treatments and applications and solutions to help control these summer fly populations that, we see ramping up in the poultry house around this time. So, Dr. Welsher, thank you for being on the podcast today to share this information with our listeners. This is really important information. And, as we talked about, very seriously tied in with food safety, as well as bird welfare. So thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you again.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Dr. Alissa Welsher for this informative conversation, and Elanco for sponsoring this episode. You can find more information about Elanco's food safety solutions for poultry production by visiting their website, farmanimal.elanco.com/US/poultry. I know it's a lot. It's worth it. Hang in there. We'll do it again. farmanimal.elanco.com/US/poultry. All right. You can also access that link in the show notes of your podcast player or on the episode page on our website, food-safety.com. All right. We hope you enjoyed this special episode of Food Safety Matters, and we'll talk to you soon.